I think I first met Charles Handy as a result of a lecture which I gave at the RSA, and also through my father, who was a great inspiration to me in the work that we eventually did in the Tomorrow's Company inquiry. And it so happened that Charles was chairman of the RSA and rang me up one day when I was not doing as well as I should have been in my job then as sales and marketing director in a printing company, and suggested I went to work for the RSA and get business more involved. And long story short, I eventually did. When I got there, I discovered that I was going to meet Charles on another occasion because he was giving Open University degrees at a ceremony at Ely Cathedral, and my wife Conker was to be one of the recipients. So while they were there, we invited them over to Suffolk, and we went out on the boat together. And as we were chugging down the River Ald, Charles said to me, "I've been asked to give this lecture on the subject, what is a company for? Do you think that's a good idea?" And I remember saying, after I joined the RSA, this was, "Charles, I think that's a great idea. You give the lecture and let me see what we can do on the back of it." That was in the summer of 1990. Charles gave the lecture in December 1990. My father was in the audience, and indeed Charles quoted my father in that lecture, and quoted my father also quoting Lord Eustace Percy on the subject of the inappropriateness of current company law. And I did stand up at the end of that lecture and say, if there are any RSA fellows who'd like to join me in examining these issues, please contact me. That was 1990. During 1991, we held a series of events, and I remember Adrian Cadbury being involved in one of them, and my good colleague Eva Beasley, who had joined the RSA as development officer, worked very closely with me as we began to develop the idea of an inquiry into the company of the future. Our first title for it was Rethinking the Company. The RSA Council did me the service of saying they didn't like that idea very much. And I came back with the idea, which actually was stolen, of Tomorrow's Company. I say stolen because I'd been invited that summer of 1991 to go to the Aspen Institute, where I attended a seminar with US business leaders on tomorrow's corporation. And I think that that name just kind of went through the brain and stuck somewhere in the system. And so by the end of 1991, a year on from Charles's lecture, we had reached the point with Eva, and Peter Ward of Coopers and Lybrand then became involved of developing a proposal for an inquiry. And we started to plan a series of dinners which took place during 1992. They were chaired by great luminaries of the time, people like Sir John Harvey-Jones, who'd been chairman of ICI, and Lord Alexander, who was chairman of the then NatWest Bank, and Adrian Cadbury. And there was one which was led by Charles himself. And those dinners were extraordinary occasions where business leaders really let their hair down and said what, in private, said the things they wouldn't have said in public about what concerned them. Why were their children not interested in going to work for the companies they work for? I remember one American chief executive saying, "Why will my son never fill up his car in an Exxon gas station?" Because this was after Exxon Valdez. Long-termism, short-termism very quickly came into the debate. And so we started to say, well, if you're concerned about these issues, we're going to follow up these dinners by coming to see you and inviting you to be part of an inquiry into the company of the future. And with the help of Eva Beasley, and Sir Geoffrey Chandler, the late Sir Geoffrey Chandler, who was the RSA's industry matters man at the time, went on, of course, to do so much with Amnesty and business and human rights. With their help, we developed a prospectus, and I seem to remember we'd had about 70 to 80 business leaders through those dinners, and about 25% of them signed up to the inquiry. And we, by the end of the year, this is now, we're now talking the end of 1992, we now have an inquiry team. And one of the people who'd signed up, who in fact came to the very first dinner I remember, was Tony Cleaver, Sir Anthony Cleaver. And I was suitably awed by being in the presence of Tony Cleaver, and was then interrogated by his head of public affairs, Sarah Portway. In fact, I got interrogated twice. The first time was to see whether we could persuade Tony to be in the inquiry. The second time was when our little planning team, consisting of RSA council members like Martin Finlay, then Vice Chairman of Whitbread, and Dick O'Nions, the late great Dick O'Nions, who was Baring Venture Capital Partners and a wonderful mentor. With that planning team, we decided that we'd like to invite Tony to lead the inquiry team. And so then I was interrogated again by Sarah Portray. I remember being taken to lunch by her and asked lots of questions. And obviously the interview went well, because we subsequently learnt that Tony would be willing to chair the inquiry. And so it was very early in 1993 that we gathered together for that first dinner. And so looking back on all of that, what strikes me was it was a 2-year campaign, from Charles asking the question to us getting that first inquiry team together. And then things seemed to pick up the pace very quickly, because I have to say Tony was a great chairman of the inquiry, and the first thing he did when we had that initial dinner was he divided us into groups to represent different stakeholder interests, and we had, and Eva and I facilitated these 5 groups, one to represent customers, suppliers, employees, shareholders and the community. And of course, in a way, that very decision helped to lay the foundations for what we ended up calling the 5+1 approach, or the idea that success ultimately needs to be thought about in the context of 5 key stakeholders and the leadership who give the purpose and the values to make an organisation successful. And that was really the kicking off point for the whole inquiry.